Good afternoon. My name is Christine Wade. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science and International Studies and the curator of the Goldstein Program in Public Affairs. On behalf of the Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture, the CV Starr Center for the American Experience, and the Goldstein Program, it is my honor to welcome you to our program, Perspectives on Global Diplomacy. Sir Harold George Nicholson described the ideal qualities of a diplomat as truth, accuracy, calm, patience, good temper, modesty, and loyalty. Our honorees today, Sir Richard Dalton and Ambassador Frank Wisner, have exemplified those qualities and so many more during the course of their long and distinguished careers. They have, in fact, elevated diplomacy to an art form. Diplomacy is one of the most important instruments in foreign policy in any state's toolkit. On quieter days, diplomats build bridges between countries and communities by sharing and exchanging knowledge, and this creates an important foundation for engagement when challenges arise. In times of crisis, they must advance the national interest while constructively engaging a recalcitrant partner. And they must do so with great prudence, for the cost of failure may be grave. At their best, they shape not only opinions and decisions abroad, but at home as well, sometimes speaking truth to some very real power. In our increasingly globalized world, diplomacy is more important than ever. Our need to understand one another, to work with one another to solve serious problems such as climate change, poverty, nuclear proliferation, and the horrors of war and violence requires nothing less than the intelligence, courage, and discernment of our finest diplomats. Whether it's in opening relations with Libya, negotiating nuclear issues with Iran, engaging a faltering apartheid regime, securing independence for Kosovo, or trying to convince an entrenched Egyptian leader to resign, our honorees have demonstrated that the challenges we face are better solved at the negotiating table than on the battlefield. We should never falter in our quest to find political solutions to political problems, and this is diplomacy at its finest. It is now my pleasure to introduce President Sheila Bair, the 28th President of Washington College, to deliver remarks and read the mandamus.
Thank you, Dr. Wade, and welcome all of you to this very special evening to honor two very special guests and hear their very important perspectives. From the dawn of human history, the Middle East has been a region of mystery and importance. It is the birthplace of three major religions, with a proud tradition of scholarship and artistic achievement. As a global crossroads, the region's significance has not diminished. More recently, however, the Middle East has been perceived as a region of conflict and even quagmire, with disputes over territory, resources, and most importantly, religion. Many of us despair of understanding the problems, much less coming up with solutions. It takes wise and bold thinkers to navigate through these issues, understanding the emotions and history that have shaped the past, clearly explaining current realities to their own citizens, and maintaining optimism for a more hopeful future. Today's awardees have shown just that, wisdom and boldness, as well as a third quality, personal courage, which prompted them to seek out and to excel in challenging, often dangerous places. With pride and gratitude, I am happy to bestow honorary degrees on Sir Richard Dalton and Ambassador Frank Wisner. I will now read the mandamus. It having been certified by the faculty to the visitors and governors of Washington College that Sir Richard J. Dalton and Frank G. Wisner are of acknowledged eminence and distinction, have made worthwhile and noteworthy contributions to our society, and are therefore worthy to receive the highest honors. You are hereby authorized and directed, in accordance with the ordinance to that effect, to confer at the public symposium of December 8, 2015, to Sir Richard J. Dalton, honoris causa, the degree of Doctor of Laws, and to Frank G. Wisner, honoris causa, the degree of Doctors of Laws. It is my pleasure to invite Sir Richard Dalton to the lectern at this point. Sir Richard J. Dalton, as a diplomat, linguist, and foreign policy advocate, dedicated his career to finding peaceful and long-lasting solutions to the multifaceted problems of the Middle East. Fluent in Arabic and French, eloquent in both speech and prose, he worked tirelessly to explain the complicated political issues that continue to shape the world's headlines. As a member of Her Majesty's diplomatic service, Sir Richard studied Arabic in Lebanon and honed his fluency while serving in Jordan and Oman. Always concerned with broader policy issues, he wrote substantive studies of security architecture in the Persian Gulf, Libya's efforts to secure weapons of mass destruction, and the Iranian nuclear program. His expertise, diplomatic skills, and ability to find areas of productive compromise have made the world a safer place for us all. Ambassador Dalton's distinguished diplomatic assignments included service as Consul General in Jerusalem, in effect the ambassador to the Palestinian Authority, as the first British ambassador to Libya after a 17-year hiatus, and as ambassador to Iran, where he effectively worked to limit that country's military nuclear program. He subsequently headed the Libyan British Business Council, continuing to promote better relations with the Arab world. Sir Richard Dalton, in recognition of your distinguished career as a political leader, statesman, and peacemaker, it is my pleasure to bestow on you the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws. So, let me give you this.
Thank you.
I'm going to hood you now. I hope this isn't too distracting for your remarks. Becomes him, doesn't it? Thank you. The mic is yours, please.
President Bear, faculty, students, guests, I appreciate deeply the recognition you have paid to my country and the honor you have done me. Thank you for the generous words you have said about me. Anything I did was as a team of two with my wife. She has been my homeland and my security, my advisor and my co-worker. We are truly grateful to President Bear, to the Board of Visitors and Governors of the College, and to the faculty for what you have done. I should also mention former President Jay Griswold, a friend we have made in recent years, but a friend indeed to us and, of course, to a much greater extent to your university. And we're truly sensible of his contribution to getting everyone together here today. Thank you, Jay. The United States of America and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland are close friends and allies in war and peace. It is a great thing to know not only that the US is with us every day when threats arise, but also that in the councils of the world, most recently in the deliberations in Paris on climate change, the US is a strong leader. There is, of course, a well-known truth that it is in the hearts of people that the defenses of peace should be constructed. How true it is also that it is in the hearts of people that the foundations of an enduring alliance are laid at many levels and in many personal encounters. You have taken such a step today And our hearts go out to all of you here and to the community of George Washington College. We all of us know in our heart of hearts what kind of world we want. It should be safe. It should be comprised of free peoples. It should develop sustainably. Families and individuals should be healthy. States should cooperate. Respect should be paid to diversity. And justice should inform the actions of us all. And we want a world in which more conflicts are settled through discussion and ever less through violence. But we know as well how far we are from achieving such ideals. It can seem that, hard as we try to move forward, the headwinds blowing the world back are stronger. Looking across the 45 years since I joined the British Diplomatic Service, what has gone best has been the social changes, the spread of education, the lessening of the ravages of disease, some reduction in poverty, thus in population birth rates. In politics, I am proud of the integration of European countries in the European Union, the near completion of decolonization, the fall of communism, and the spread of representative government in Europe, Africa, Latin America, and now most recently in Burma. So there is plenty of encouragement to be found to inspire the new generation to build higher and better, and to work to correct the failures of my generation. I hope, for example, that much more will be done from now on to end discrimination and violence against women, which is rife. Humanity is too prone to tolerate much that is unacceptable with a sigh, saying, well, that's human nature, that's a fact of life. It is not. It is the product of centuries of acceptance of religious dogma, of reluctance to challenge hallowed ideas. Some of the worst of humanity's political failures have been in making wars or not stopping them. I was born in the year of the partition of India in 1948, which cost millions of lives. I came into government service at the end of Vietnam and of the war in Biafra, Nigeria. Many years later, we failed to intervene to stop the genocide in Rwanda. Many say we were supine until far too late in former Yugoslavia. We were bystanders when Russia tore Chechnya apart. In my area of work in the Middle East, it is painful to admit we have actively fostered conflict, including with an illegal war in Iraq in 2003, and by abandoning our ideals of freedom and self-determination in tolerating the expansion of Israel and the continued oppression of the Palestinian people. So sadly, that violent extremism in the name of Islam flourishes is down in part to the deeds of Britain and the US. Only in part, in small part, of course. Boko Haram, for example, would have arisen whatever we had done or not done elsewhere. But everywhere, it is exploiting breakdown of political systems and the resulting disorder. And in Iraq, we helped create that underlying breakdown and disorder. It is true that a tiny minority hate us for what we are, or because of what they believe, but many more hate us for what we have done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I wanted to commend to you some principles of conduct that I would want to keep in mind if I was starting out again. There are many threats to well-being, to a world progressing in the way we wish. You'll be glad to hear that I'm not going to go through them all. But I would like to say something about three: interstate wars, gross systematic human rights abuses, and terrorism. The United Nations, set up by the victors in 1945 to lift the scourge of war from mankind by promoting cooperation, providing means for peaceful settlement, of disputes, and if that failed, of enforcing peace. Honor the UN, cherish it, join the United States United Nations Association. The UN is still the world's best hope. It can, thinking more practically, extend and reinforce the US' own efforts to protect its interests and to promote the general good. Above all, in the UN context, respect and reinforce the prohibition on waging wars other than in self-defense or when authorized by the UN Security Council. There may be times when an emergency requires unilateral action, or member states' interests may lead to deadlock in the UN Security Council. But remember that the post-World War II settlement, international settlement, that included the prohibition on aggression that I've mentioned was in part the creation of the US, because it was a vital US interest to have it, and it still is. There's a general point here, too, so eloquently put by President Truman. No country is above the law, he said in his speech to the final plenary session of the founding conference of the UN. We all have to recognize, no matter how great our strength, that we must deny ourselves the license to do as we please. If the US and its allies remember that, how much easier it will be to address transgressors, whether it is in Russia, in Ukraine, or now Saudi Arabia and its allies continuing their immoral war in Yemen. And we still need to work internationally to establish a common understanding and acceptance of when the application of force is legal and legitimate. That's going to be ongoing work for your generation. It's going to be hard, as it is to see a way to address the poor record of the international community in meeting the challenge posed by large-scale, gross human rights abuses. Here I simply have to say that there will never be clear rules. Each case will be different. Action will be taken collectively in some cases, while others will be neglected. To intervene in Libya, to quote a controversial example, in my view, was the right thing to do. The failure, subsequently, was not primarily ours. So each time the possibility arises of armed intervention to save a population, certain test questions will come up for answer. At their simplest, is there political support at home for us to send forces? Is there regional support? Is there a strategy and a plan that will get us in effectively, that will improve the situation without making it worse, and that will get us out? Under the heading of terrorism, of course, a single death is one too many. But I beg you, keep extremist violence in the United States in perspective. It is not the worst danger you face. It is not a world war or a threat to everything. The New York Times told me the day before yesterday that since 9/11, there have been as many deaths in mainland United States caused by non-Islamic violent extremism as by jihadi extremism. Some 45 of each, and at a time and in a period when there have been 200,000 murders. And I have to say, the British of my generation know what we're talking about. A few Northern Irish murderers brought political terrorism to our streets in the 1970s and 1980s, and you have to tough it out. The US has never, after all, been able to stride the world, righting all wrongs and keeping everyone safe. So the widely mourned sense I detect here of loss of control, of there being less US leadership in the world, of a decline of power, is largely an illusion, but ambitious politicians like to make you anxious about it. I say they are false prophets. The United States is not exceptional in having to work one country at a time, one issue at a time, one policy at a time, trying to be guided by justice. There's no magic key, there's no magic bullet that can spare the United States and its people the agony of facing sometimes success and sometimes failure, but still striving. I was amused the other day in Piccadilly Circus in the heart of London to see the huge electronic billboard. Coca-Cola's always had a prominent place there, and they claim you can choose happiness by choosing Coca-Cola. I ask you, yet daily we appear to lap up similarly daft political slogans. My Prime Minister accuses the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition in Parliament of being a terrorist sympathizer. My Secretary of State for Foreign Commonwealth Affairs repeats from the dispatch box the refrain that Islamic State hates us for what we are, not for what we do. Can't he see that it's both? And I don't need to comment on your presidential race, but you see what where I'm coming from. So for the next generation, please distrust simplifications and slogans. Question everything and put the peddlers of Coca-Cola politics in their place. Don't do the terrorists' work for them, as President Obama put it so well the night before last, by overreacting, by discriminating on grounds of origin or belief, or by turning your backs on your noble tradition of welcoming the bereft and the homeless. So hold your leaders and your allies, where necessary, to account, to high standards, not only your enemies. Save on your own national expenditure so you can pass on a higher proportion of your wealth in development assistance to the less fortunate in other countries. I could go on, but I've got to come to an end. We know what we want. We can see that the odds are poor for ending wars and civil wars and for the world becoming a better place just yet. Perhaps we are in for more disorder, less recourse to international law and to the UN. But it's not inevitable. Working together, you can make a contribution to well-being and progress. You can be better behaved tenants of this fragile globe and biosphere than my generation has been. And you can hand the world on to subsequent generations in a better shape than you found it. And there will always be a welcome in Britain for Americans. Elizabeth and I would love to see another group from the college at our home. When you study at Kipling Hall, if any of you are going in that direction. And finally, keep up your connections with Europe as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Richard. That was amazing. It is now my pleasure to invite Ambassador Frank Wisner to join me on the stage. Ambassador Frank G. Wisner, in a period of global conflict and rapid change, dedicated his career to understanding and harnessing the forces that shape international affairs. His first assignment was to newly independent Algeria. That was followed by 4 years in Vietnam during the height of the war, and subsequent service in Tunisia and Bangladesh. Those hardship posts shaped and informed his response to the unfolding policy crises of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Working with Cyrus Vance in the administration of President Carter and in more senior positions in the Bush and Clinton administrations gave him a keen appreciation for the role of politics and public opinion in the formulation of foreign policy. As the United States ambassador to Zambia, Egypt, the Philippines, and India, he eloquently promoted American interest while accurately conveying the concerns of the developing world to your own government. More recently, Ambassador Wisner co-chaired an independent working group tasked with building a model for stronger U.S.-Iraqi relations after the American military intervention. This model focused on humanitarian assistance, the rule of law, and greater cooperation across sectarian divisions. At home, he continues strong advocacy for bipartisan national security and foreign policy decisions. As a board member of the Partnership for a Secure America, International House, the National Security Network, Refugees International, and many other nonprofit organizations, Ambassador Wisner has continued to share his sage advice gleaned from many decades of study and of application. Ambassador Frank G. Wisner, in recognition of your distinguished career as a political leader, statesman, and peacemaker, it is my pleasure to bestow on you the honorary degree, Doctor of Laws.
Madam President, let me open my remarks this evening with heartfelt thanks for a truly flattering introduction. I could barely recognize myself. I am utterly delighted to hear that from you and to once again be at Washington College this evening, but especially to receive the honor that you, Madam President, have just bestowed upon me. I feel a bond of particular sympathy or affection for the college, having spent much of my youth and grown up off and on in this part of Maryland. I believe very deeply in this college, its contribution to the welfare of the Eastern Shore and well beyond its borders. I'm particularly impressed with its continued devotion to the principles of the liberal arts. I have been struck by the contributions you make to American civilization and its studies, and now the work that you're doing to promote better understanding, wiser policies for the environment of our precious Chesapeake Bay region. My congratulations, Madam President, to you on your assumption of your new office. You come to this particular place in your life as one of the nation's great financial regulators, a teacher, an author, but there isn't one of us in this room who doesn't recognize that the harshest economic downturn in our times, the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, was in large part, mitigated by your hard, thoughtful, wise, and dedicated work. It's also my pleasure to be this evening in the presence of my wife and my brother, who are here with me, and my lifelong friend, Harry Sears, who I have come to admire even more with his unique dedication to the cause of a better environment. To Matt Daly, my colleague from years in the diplomatic service, General Bob Diker of the United States Air Force, our time together in the Pentagon. To you, all of you, Madam President, yourself, the faculty, the Board of Trustees, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the wonderful welcome you've given me this evening. I've chosen to take a slightly different path from my fellow honoree, Sir Richard Dalton, a truly great British diplomat, as you've just heard, as he articulated a broad and compelling vision of the state of our world. I have long admired British diplomacy. In fact, throughout my career as an American diplomat, I relied heavily on the advice and counsel of my British diplomatic colleagues in virtually every post I served in. No one gave me a clearer idea of the rights and wrongs of policies that I was advising or pursuing. No one could I count on for greater and more articulate candor. And it is, therefore, a privilege, Sir Richard, to be with you tonight and to share this podium. But behind that tradition of collaboration between two diplomats lies deeper truths about the respective relations between our two countries. It is only appropriate that a college like this studies the role of British institutions. They are the birth point in our own history. What makes us unique as a people started in so many instances in the institutions of Great Britain, and we're wise to understand Britain's history and trajectory. But we also recognize that especially in the course of this century, the last century and this one, we in Britain have been bound in common causes, and we've both profited from a close association. It behooves all of us to work to maintain that relationship, one that is being sore tested by many, many issues in the world today, but which I believe is essential for our respective prosperity. For, indeed, we live in a most troubled world, a world fraught with tensions, America's place in this world being contested by many of us from many vantage points, not the least of which is the growth of Islamic radicalism. But as we stand back and look at our response to the multiple challenges we face, I'm not alone, I suspect, as I look around this audience, in hoping we will come up to the mark and produce leaders capable of leading us into this century, that our current selection of candidates for the presidency, I'd like to think this nation could do better. We deserve good leadership, and I, for one, hope we are going to find it. The public service is a very special vocation. I left one aspect of it, the diplomatic service, after 36 years, plus several others, when I was called back for the negotiations to end Serbia's claim to Kosovo. After 36 years, to return to this country and to make my life here. At my retirement in 1997, in the presence of then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, I looked around the room at my colleagues of many years standing, and I said to them something I believe today, and that is the public service is the highest calling. I meant by that many aspects of public service. Indeed, the one I had chosen, diplomacy. I regarded similarly public service in the intelligence services of our country, the military services, the political institutions and legislatures, the civil service, the many layers of government. But I meant by public service something even beyond the formal institutions of government, to the kind of broad dimension of public service contained in law, in medicine, in religion, and education. Certainly, each of us appreciates the fact in whatever professional endeavors we choose in our lives, we need to keep in the forefront the great principles of our history, ethics and philosophy and religion. We have to be sensitive to the welfare of our fellow men. And by that, at heart, I mean respect. Respect for others, compassion for others, to serve as true civic engagement, artists of true civic engagement, stewards of our environment, conscious of the welfare of lands and peoples abroad. That means the public service. And no better example do any of us have to a life devoted to public service than you, the fortunate members of the community of Washington College, in the presence of your new president, Sheila Bair. Now, as I look back at the starting point of public service, it comes clearly to me that that starting point is a matter of principle. How we understand our principles, how those principles have evolved over the course of the years. And our principles are derived from careful contemplation of what this college so deeply and truly stands for, a commitment to liberal arts. That collection of notions born in classical antiquity that permits each of us to understand the roles we have to play in society, how we fit into our civic life, how we participate in public debate, how we defend ourselves in our courts, how we serve on juries, how we serve in the military, how we serve in the broader fields of governance. Public service flows from an understanding of liberal arts. Traditionally, they were narrowly defined as math and music, grammar and logic, but over the years, the liberal arts have expanded their definition to include literature and language, art history, philosophy, history, the subjects that you study every day in this college, whose traditions you perpetuate through your study and the teaching of those points. Why are the liberal arts important to me, and why do I believe they lay at the heart of public service? It is the development of critical thinking, the ability to analyze, the ability to make choices, the ability to be able to discern. Washington College has stood for these principles since its founding in 1782, and institutions like the C.V. Starr Center for the Study of the American Experience and the Study of the Environment I mentioned earlier, each of these are ways in which you prepare your citizenship for future roles in public life. At heart, what we are trying to do is to understand our institutions, how they've evolved, where they're headed, and the roles that we will play. Now, every man has a bias, and I have one in particular when I think of the tasks of study that lie before you, and that is the special place in history, the study of history. No course in my mind is more essential than the study of history. I believe very deeply that the more you look back, as Winston Churchill said, the farther you look forward. Understanding history is essential to understanding American foreign policy. Recently, Niall Ferguson, in his new biography of Henry Kissinger, noted after reflecting on Kissinger's early life, he said, "I missed the crucial point in American foreign policy of the history deficit. The fact that key decision makers know almost nothing, not just of other countries' pasts, but of their own. Worse, they often do not see what is wrong with their ignorance." And yet, I believe it is even more than that. It is through the study of history and of philosophy that we shape the choices in public policy. Statecraft, as Kissinger once reminded us, reading Thucydides, he noted the present, while never repeating the past exactly, must inevitably resemble it. Hence, so must the future. And he went on to say, one must study history to see why nations succeed and why others have failed. These are critical points in the elaboration of an education that prepares us for citizenship in this world and in the stewardship of our own country. How to apply history is another matter. Subtly and cautiously, history isn't a cookbook offering pre-tested solutions, but it is up to us to decide what we apply. Well, if a liberal arts education lies at the heart of public service and the stewardship of our nation, one has to look at what is the role today of aspects of our university life that are being contested. Forefront of my concerns is the issue of the role of debate. Challenging ideas, refining ideas through discussion, shaping alternatives and choices are critical to acquiring knowledge and making decisions. It's essential to challenge ideas. It is equally essential, at the same time, to respect the person with whom you are debating. No, there is no excuse to belittle another man or to wound or insult him. But it is important to challenge ideas and challenge them frankly. Safe space, a concept that is currently debated in our nation, is, to my judgment, where we guarantee the freedom of debate. And in debate and exchange, freedom that is based surely on mutual respect. So I really have no time at all for the idea of protected spaces where we don't challenge one another's ideas. But we do insist on freedom. Freedom is a responsibility that falls to every generation, and it falls to our own. To expand its meaning, my generation had the privilege of extending the freedom of civil rights to African Americans. This has been followed by the expansion of the rights of women, with much more to do, and the rights of those whose sexual orientation is different with ours, or those who suffer from disabilities. The frontier of freedom changes constantly, and it behooves all of us to keep pushing it forward. Change, I feel, is evolutionary. We could not have achieved in 1961, when I left university, what we can achieve today, and so it will inevitably be in the years ahead. But there's another aspect that I find troubling, another dimension, and that is the habit to judge the past by the standards of the present. Do we have the right to blackguard our ancestors without understanding the context and the intellectual climates within which they operated? Is it right for my alma mater to talk about removing the name of Woodrow Wilson, a truly great president, from the buildings of the campus after judging him solely on one ground, the civil rights record of his administration? Can we not look at history more carefully and accept the circumstances surrounding successive generations, not holding them guilty of crimes committed, but looking at them as path breakers that led us to where we are? The question of debate, of principles, the question of respect of the past bears with us today. And I'd like to think, as I look at each of you and we go forward in our own lives, these principles will guide us, and particularly those of us who choose the path of public service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Wisner. Washington College is most pleased to welcome you and Sir Richard to our most recent alumni, a very distinguished group. And I would also like to thank former President Jay Griswold for introducing these two outstanding individuals to us and allowing us to honor them and them to join a very distinguished group of honorary degree holders from Washington College. I would now like to invite Associate Professor Tahir Shad to join our alumni on the stage. Dr. Shad has distinguished himself as a professor of political science and international studies, faculty advisor, concentrating in African and Near Eastern studies, and as the director of the program in Islamic, Turkish, and Near Eastern studies. Professor Shad has agreed to moderate the conversation we will now hear between our visiting ambassadors, and Professor Shad will then take a few questions from our students. Thank you very much.
So I thought we'll have a conversation on diplomacy, the Middle East, North Africa, and so forth. But I wanted to just tell you what the protocol will be. About 50 of my students sent in questions that they wanted to ask our distinguished guests. And I narrowed that down to about 5 or 6 questions that I'll ask them. I didn't want to ask them all 51 questions. And then we will open it up to the audience for a few questions as we conclude the program. So the first question is for Ambassador Wisner. And this is a question that sort of concerns the overall scope of international politics. In 1991, there was a great deal of hope for the international system. The Washington Consensus had won, the Soviet Union had declined, and yet we didn't see the peace dividend. And we are now witnessing turmoil, conflict all over the world. And do you think that Samuel Huntington was right when he argued that the next conflict will be a clash of civilizations? Conflict will be cultural rather than economic or political. So that, sir, is to you.
Well, it's a huge subject, and I'll try to give at least a partial answer to it. I did not agree at the time when Sam Huntington wrote his treatise. I don't agree with it today. But I will tell you why I don't agree with it. I believe it starts from a false premise, and that is that there is something called peace that we grasp as a dividend for our exertions. I don't believe peace is ever a fixed state, that peace is a constant pursuit of balance, of moderation, of dealing with issues, of managing conflict. The pursuit of peace is what really peace is about. So when you look back and say to yourself, has the post-Berlin Wall world that we live in, does that itself represent a failure of the international system, or is it an extension of history? I would argue it is the latter. And I don't believe it culminates in any great clash of civilizations, for there is as much evidence to say the world is pulling together in so many important ways, just as there are issues that are arising. I looked today, and Oliver Roy, the French sociologist, historian, I thought captured it when he said recently about Islamic radicalism, it's much less about the radicalization of Islam than it is about the Islamization of radicalism. Radicalism, nihilism, has been part of our life and history for years. There's nothing new about it. And so I part company with Sam Huntington. But then the rest of the answer has to be, what do you do? And here, I believe, we are faced with fundamental challenges. Richard Dalton today captured so many of the points that I would want to make that I won't beat them to death. I believe he put it absolutely right, that this is a world about achieving balance and respect, about the balance of power between great nations, about a willingness to take on the great issues of our day, climate change, human rights, and cope with those of economic development. We have a range of challenges in front of us, but we need to approach those challenges collectively. And where elements of the international system break out and confront, then they must be dealt with, principally with political means, backed by military means in their exception, but forcefully when it's required, as indeed the case is today with the radicalism of ISIS, of Daesh.
And thank you very much. Next question goes to you. And the question is this: what, in your opinion, is the final solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict? A two-state... a two-state solution or a one-state solution?
The two-state solution. The one-state solution is often advocated by Palestinians who say, well, if the Israelis won't give us rights within a second state, and they say they are committed to democracy, then let them give us rights within a single state. But it wouldn't work. And the Israelis want a Jewish state. So forget it. As for the two-state solution, the prospects currently are very poor, it has to be said. Neither leader across the divide currently believes that peace can be negotiated. And there is no external power able to knock heads together. My view is that there should be, and that should be a coalition of states, including the United States, but without the United States in the preeminent position, including the European Union, Russia, China, significant states of the region in which Israel and the Palestinians find themselves, and that they should be tasked with elaborating parameters for a solution laid down by the UN Security Council and negotiating them, but backing up that negotiation with the kind of incentives and penalties to which other states responsible for issues which have defied settlement are exposed. To my mind, for example, though this is moot, there has never been any more reason to sanction Iran than there has been currently to sanction Israel, particularly with respect to the policy of wishing to take more Palestinian land for settlements of people who have no right to be there. So I believe we're in a period of reflection. I hope the United Nations Security Council will take the matter up, but it is extremely difficult to get the attention of any world powers to this matter right now. Attentions are elsewhere. There is a serious problem in all our countries of what you could call political bandwidth. And the bandwidth available, the time available, the energy available to look at issues in the Middle East is currently taken up elsewhere. So the suffering of the Palestinians is being prolonged. The chances that a minority among them will, after all, they're the third generation that has been oppressed in this way, a minority among them will continue to take up arms, which will be a futile exercise, quite apart from being wrong in itself. So one is clear what the solution should be, but totally unclear as to how to get from where we are to that solution.
So do you think we'll get there at some point?
I do. My heart tells me we will. My head tells me that we haven't got a clear path right now.
Okay. All right. The next question is on the Islamic State. That's for you too, as well. So there have been many different strategies proposed to defeat the Islamic State, including increased U.S. military presence, total withdrawal of troops from the region alongside increased negotiations, and a UN initiative for military action. What do you think is the most likely course of action that nations will take to defeat the Islamic State?
I think the policy mix is about right now. Unpopular thing to say, but my view on it was created in part by a very eloquent article by Dan Kurtzer, one of your very distinguished colleagues, Frank, who wrote, I'm afraid I can't tell you, I'd love to give you the citation right now. It was about 4 days ago. Yes. And he said, please remember, US citizens, the strategy put together by General John Allen on behalf of President Obama, comprised of a series of small steps which you have to see through separately and which you hope in the long run will bring the kind of pressures to bear that will degrade and ultimately destroy IS. Among them are everything you hear about. interdicting supplies on the border between Turkey and Syria, continued airstrikes, continued efforts to assist the Iraqis to create a functioning state which can defend its territory on the basis of greater harmony between the different communities within the borders of Iraq. Working, as I'm sure will be one of the questions which come up later, to generate external and internal support in Syria for a political process, because it will only be Syrians that ultimately end this conflict. All wars end either through exhaustion and a negotiation, or through a defeat and a negotiation. We don't know what the path will be in Syria or when it will happen. But I do think that with additional resources, additional international determination, compromise within that group of external states that are meddling in Libya, we can make the current set of measures look more like the beginning of a settlement.
Do you think there ought to be boots on the ground?
Well, there are,
I mean, a lot more.
in a very small special forces detachment. I'm pulled in two directions on this. I can see it's an easy thing to ask for, but then I also think that President Obama had a strong point in his speech the night before last when he talked about the potentially negative effects of a large-scale foreign presence, and where he was strong enough to admit that there are serious problems with comprehension, with strategy, with the interface between a foreign army and the local political elements and military elements which are ultimately going to have to form a solution. So I must say I do waver on this, but ultimately, at present, I'm where President Obama is.
Okay. Thank you. So next one's for you. Since you've experienced in South Asia, how can the conflict between India and Pakistan be solved, and in particular, Kashmir?
Well, I thought you were just going to ask Richard all the hard questions. You obviously saved one for me. But I can't resist adding one thought to the last question you asked, Richard, in literally one sentence. I believe in more boots on the ground, but I believe they should be Iraqi and Syrian boots.
Okay. Yes.
And our objective should be to train, empower back their own ability to liberate their lands, free themselves of ISIS, of Daesh, so that we don't have to live through this nightmare time and again. If that takes time, then let it take time. But they alone can work their way through this problem. And to be even sharper about it, I also believe that the boots that are going to have to be on the ground, particularly in Iraq, are going to have to be largely Sunni, which means a reconfiguration of the political balance in Baghdad itself, and a willingness to empower the Sunni elements of Iraq so that they feel they've got a cause to fight for. But let me come back to the question you put to me. In an ironic way, the answer is not dissimilar. The answer to a problem, the problem that has persisted since independence and partition in South Asia between India and Pakistan, will only be settled by Indians and Pakistanis. That is, it can only be settled when Indians and Pakistanis reach a point where they believe it is more important for each one to settle than to remain at loggerheads. Until that happens, there is no amount of outside pressure or cajoling that is going to lead them to compromise what they think their best positions are. But I go even one step further. In the case of India and Pakistan, it isn't about the ability of these two sides to talk to one another. They both have embassies in each other's capitals. Their leaders meet in regional fora. They regularly gather at the General Assembly in New York. They even attend one another's inaugurations. It isn't a lack of communications. It's a lack of will to take steps that will compromise long-standing principles. Now, we've come within grasp of feeling our way toward a settlement. I think General Musharraf and Atal Bihari Vajpayee almost reached that, one for Pakistan, one for India, when they talked about disengaging along the line of control, that point of division in Kashmir that followed the struggle for Kashmir in the late 1940s. Withdraw their troops, allow free circulation, respect the fact that control of the two parts of Kashmir will remain fundamentally Indian and Pakistani. Don't try to change borders and force a solution, but allow the two sides of Kashmir to begin to trade, to communicate. These are all the common points. At the moment, I am not holding my breath. I'm not doing that because I don't today feel there is adequate will in either Delhi or in Islamabad to make those essential compromises. Modi has a very different agenda and some, to be blunt, some other thoughts about the perennial struggle of Hindus and Muslims in South Asia. The Pakistanis themselves remain divided, a divided house. The civilian government has constantly to watch its flank with the military. And the military in Pakistan derives a raison d'etre from the Kashmir conflict and tension with India. So I don't see an early or easy breakthrough. But at the same time, I've come to be used to a very essential fact, and that is that India and Pakistan, as irksome as they can be one with the other, know how to stop just short of making real trouble for themselves and the rest of us. The day of Indo-Pak wars are some decades past. Terrorism notwithstanding, there is a kind of inherent fail-safe that leaves us not comfortable. We must always be uncomfortable, but leaves us without the sense of Armageddon is about to occur.
Thank you very much for that. The next question's for you. What role has Saudi Arabia played in the growth of Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and Sunni Muslim extremism? Why is the U.S. silent on Saudi Arabia and the export of radical Wahhabism?
Well, there are many different answers to this question. There's the Saudi one, that of course the teachings of Wahhabi Islam expressly prohibit harm to the innocent and expressly require order rather than disorder within the world of Islam and the Arab homeland. There's the view of Shia in the Saudi area. I heard very eloquently put forward by a statesman not from Saudi Arabia but from another country that Saudi Arabia, it is incumbent upon them to spend billions undoing the harm that they've done by the propagation of Salafism with some takfiri elements to it, the harm that they have done over many, many years. There's a third answer, which is that the problem is not a particular nation's version of the role of Islam in public affairs, namely Saudi Arabia, nor is the answer some form of long-term alteration of the arrangements around the world for Islamic education, which is so much influenced by Saudi Arabia in so many countries, including the UK. But actually the answer lies much more deeply with all Muslims looking at aspects of the history of their religion which led to particular texts, particular sacred, immutable texts, which are open not just to interpretation, but which expressly call for certain things which then the Islamic State prays in aid, so that it's not a Wahhabi problem, but it's a more universal problem with the need for a reformation which takes some texts and says those are ones which no longer apply to the modern world. In the way that through a combination of the revelation in Palestine around the year 30, plus the reformations in the 16th, 15th and 16th and 17th centuries have done in Christianity. Taken whole chunks of text and said, no, those are not things that are going to be taught. However, I appreciate how difficult that is to put across. So I would say that the Saudis have a particular responsibility, but that rather than outsiders like us trying to say just what degree of that responsibility is towards the nature of religious education, I would say we need to bring them along to practical solutions. We need to be more resolute privately in addressing these questions with Saudi Arabia. I don't think public denunciation is going to be helpful. After all, there are prominent cases in which we are called upon to publicly advocate some solution, like Rafi Badawi and others who are sentenced to death in Saudi Arabia, particularly striking cases. We're going to have to be public on them. We should be public on them. But if you denounce a whole system, you're not going to put forward practical projects for involving the country of that system in practical solutions to the kinds of problems which Frank has been talking about, whether between civilizations or in Syria.
Okay, thank you. Well, the next question is for you too.
Oh dear.
Keep you working. What impact do you think Iran's nuclear deal has on the conventional and nuclear balance of power in the Middle East?
Well, it hasn't changed the conventional balance at all, which is immensely in the favor of Israel, the United States, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Iranian armed forces are debilitated through lack of access to modern technology and through the small scale of the budgets which Iran can put into military matters. One of the problems with the discourse about Iran, particularly the United States, to a degree in Europe, is that those who have had a vested interest in making Iran an enemy have made us all believe that Iran is 10 feet tall. The fact is they aren't. I heard General Petraeus say in 2007, that's long before the latest arms deals with Saudi Arabia and UAE, the United States manufacturers are going to make squillions, pouring yet more weapons into the hands of the UAE and Saudi Arabia. General Petraeus' view was that the UAE Air Force, if properly led, could wipe the Iranian Air Force out of the skies in a matter of days. And that's true, simply because the aircraft in question are antediluvian. And Iran is interstate conflict averse. They are not going to risk their armed forces in interstate conflict. They're not hungry for territory. They're not going to use the threat of conventional warfare to enhance their political aims in the region. As for the nuclear balance, of course, it is clearly, there is no such thing as a balance between Iran and the rest, because all the nuclear weapons are in the hands of others. All Iran's neighbors, bar Afghanistan and Iraq, have nuclear weapons. Iran hasn't had a nuclear weapons program since 2003, and it did pretty little in the years before 2003, and it has not, I believe, any intention of cheating on the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action. There are strong incentives and disincentives on Iran to stay with that deal. They'll test it, and if the United States, on the other side, were not to deliver any of the key elements, including relief from sanctions, then all bets would be off, and we might find Iran unable to sustain its wholehearted fulfillment of the agreement. So that's a short answer. I believe the world is a great deal better off with this agreement. There's no agreement that is fail-safe. There's no agreement of this kind that's beyond risk, but we have dramatically reduced the risks and increased the prospects of stability and avoiding the spread of nuclear weapons in the region by virtue of the agreement.
So overall, a good deal, you would argue.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Still awake. Yeah. All right, so this question's for you. As everyone is well aware, there is a lot of controversy worldwide over the Syrian refugee crisis. How are governments and international organizations working together to bring about sustainable solutions that will help the displaced people of Syria, North Africa?
Badly. Very badly. If you start with an estimate of the problem, there are approximately 25 million Syrians. Of that 25 million, half are displaced. Half of the half have fled the country, are in Lebanon, in Jordan, in southern Turkey, or fleeing across the Aegean and other avenues into Europe. That is the biggest human migration, violent refugee migration since the end of World War II. We've not seen anything beginning to approach it. The failure of the international community begins with the refugees inside the region. There are inadequate funds allocated by the international system to feed, care for, tent, educate, provide medical assistance to Syrian refugees inside the region, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and indeed in southern Turkey. That's not even to mention the miserably treated numbers of internally displaced. And so I was very happy when I noted among the principles in the Vienna negotiations, relief for displaced Syrians inside Syria ought to be on the package. But now let's look at the external element. The external element is massive. And at the moment, it's headed towards Europe. And as John Kerry was wont to say in a staff meeting inside the State Department a couple of weeks ago, was the fabric of European societies is not up to the accommodation of large numbers of refugees from Syria, not to mention Afghans and Iraqis and other displaced persons. That the international system needs better answers. The first answer has to come from Europe itself. There needs to be a deal with Turkey to contain those who are flowing over the border. There needs to be good systems for screening and determining who's a refugee and who's an economic migrant. And there are a lot of people sitting at various places in Europe today who fit in the latter category. Those who read this morning's or yesterday's stories of Calais recognize a lot of the people there are economic migrants. And they're going to have to be dealt with in a different way. I come back to our country. The president very tentatively stuck his toe in the water a couple of weeks ago and said, we might take 10,000 more. That's an appalling admission of what has traditionally been a core American responsibility. We have always stepped forward to take the largest number of refugees in the current world that we all have lived with. I was responsible personally for an undertaking that brought just under 1 million Indo-Chinese to our borders in the 1970s and 80s. They settled into this country without a trace, and we're all better off for it. There are better than 1 million Syro-Lebanese citizens of this country already who've proved their value as citizens. the notion that we would be intimidated by the possibility that ISIS could infiltrate refugees with violent intentions into a flow that would come to this country, when refugees we screen take 2 years of layers of multi-agency investigation, seems to me beyond farcical. And I cannot understand the view expressed by some 30 governors in this country who have no constitutional authority for immigration to make this view and stir public opinion. And that's not to mention the members of our, those competing for the presidency. The United States has the ability to take larger numbers of refugees, and we ought to do it. Canada, our near neighbor, has promised to take 25,000 by Christmas. Now, whether they are actually going to succeed or not, it's a different matter. But we know how to settle refugees in this country. And if we're worried about the odd ISIS bomb thrower making his way, there are many other ways that ISIS will infiltrate people in this country. Ordinary visas are a much quicker way than a 2-year wait in a refugee camp in Syria, in Lebanon or Jordan. It's inconceivable. So I think we ought to be doing more. I'm appalled that we are having this debate. I recognize the conflation between refugees and illegal immigration, and I'm struck that we are turning our backs on one of the finest principles of American public policy, our willingness to take people of many faiths, make them part of this country, and we grow stronger as a result of it. But finally, and I'll make one last quick point, and that is the best way to deal with the refugee problem is to get an outcome in Syria, and that means a political settlement. And to get that situation under control, then you can begin to look at the source.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for those comments, and we will now... We covered a wide range of issues, and I want to thank my students for submitting the questions. So we will now open it up to the audience for a few questions. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, with respect to American foreign policy, how much do you think the Obama administration has structurally changed the way we apply American foreign policy? And if you believe that, do you think that it will sustain itself in succeeding administrations?
This question is above my pay grade. My uninformed prejudice is that he has not changed the structure of American foreign policy. But Frank.
Well, this is one of the rare moments, Richard, you and I are going to disagree. I think the change is palpable, it's important, and despite the rhetoric of the campaign trail, it's going to have a lasting effect. If anything, I think the president is tilted a bit too far, and that is to remind Americans that we can't shoot our way out of every crisis in the world, that we need to produce political settlements, and he's going to be very chary before he inserts military force in conflicts and crisis situations. I think that change is really important, and that's going to persist for a while because it's based on a general view in the American public that we're not keen to go back to another foolish war in Iraq or another protracted engagement like Afghanistan. So I think the president has been on strong grounds there. The notion of building coalitions, I've seen it carried out particularly well in Bush 41's administration, but I see the instinct returning with Obama in a much more effective manner. It's going to have to continue to develop. The United States is not cock of the roost and be able to dictate its way through the crises. We'll have to measure our ability and play balance of power much more in the future. We have. I think Obama's moved us in that direction.
Can I take you up on that?
Wait.
Because what about Biafra? What about Chechnya? I mean, America has never been the world's policeman. It pursues its own interests. And there are as many cases in the United States not intervening to right the world's wrongs as there have been the kinds of muscular foreign policy that you're talking about. So I don't see this big change. I do see a change as a result of the effect of the Iraq War, which has had a huge effect in the UK. But is it really a structural change now that's not going to be reversed as and when the American mood changes?
I think I'm never able quite to overlook the amnesia of modern America. It seems to be a persistent, but I think we have, over the course of this century, had our tail feathers burned sufficiently that we'll be a lot more cautious. And no, we're not going to solve all the Biafras, but I think more importantly, we're not going to go into Syria. And we're not going to go into any of the military conflicts with troops on the ground. The Americans will think, American statesmen will have to think of where they are in an international context. I believe that. I may be wrong. But I want to add a more disturbing note, or a different disturbing note. And that is, I am not at all pleased with the direction of the organization of the United States government. I find that in the Obama administration, we have grown the National Security Council to a point where the National Security Council identifies problems, writes the president's choices, gets the president's green light to execute, follows up and implements, leaving stranded the points of reflection, I'm exaggerating for effect, points of reflection throughout government. And you end up in a situation in which there's a rush to judgment, particularly driven by media, to speak, to answer, to act, before the choices are properly vetted and thought through. It does not mean we're going to go back with the sort of nail and hammer solution, but it does mean that we're not yet skilled in the use of all our facilities of government, and therefore that patient reflection that precedes good diplomacy.
Okay, thank you. Answer your question?
Better than I can remember.
Okay.
Damn good answer.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I remember Sir Richard Dalton saying that Boko Haram would have arisen despite any efforts at diplomacy that would have happened in the past. And as if someone later saying that like violent Islamism has more to do with Islamization of radicalism in general than radicalization of Islam. I just kind of want to know what you meant by that.
What I meant was that Islamic millenarianism, the idea that you should exert yourself, organize people to bring about on earth God's will, and that you are called upon to emulate the deeds and behavior of the Prophet himself and those who immediately followed him in extending the realm of Islam, that these ideas have arisen in different countries at different times. And specifically in Nigeria, and in the area on the border between Nigeria and Cameroon, there have been such movements. So I was simply recording a historical fact that we shouldn't think that the world has only got to this position now. Movements, more or less disruptive, have existed and challenged the interests of imperial powers, challenged governments of areas in which they were active. on previous occasions. The ideological struggles over the meaning of dogma, have had to be conducted in the past as well.
I can't beat that.
Okay, we can take one more question and then we will wrap up. Yes, ma'am.
Tibet against China.
You want me to?
No.
Why don't you take that?
Let me start, and if Richard wants to add to it, please feel free to do so. I regret to say that the international community, including the United States, has accepted the fact that Tibet is part of China. Now, you may disagree with that historic judgment, and obviously many Tibetans do, but that is effectively the international consensus. Having said that, what we will not accept is that Tibetans are belittled and marginalized, and their spiritual leader will have no recognition. And we'll have a tough time with China in our communications with the Dalai Lama and our insistence that Tibetans be given a fair place in the land of their origins. I can predict safely that American foreign policy on that matter won't change anytime soon in my lifetime. But I am also convinced that China's intentions in Tibet will not change either. And I have a relatively pessimistic view of the future, that there will be more Han Chinese in what is geographically Tibet. There will be less Tibetan ethnic rights in the future than there are even in their limited amount today. So it is not a great story. But I take you back to a point I made to some students this afternoon. The single greatest challenge in American foreign policy today is how to cope with the rise of Chinese power. We will not succeed in pushing China back by force. China deeply believes that Tibet is part of China, and there will be no forceful conclusion to that argument. Rather, how we construct a balance with China that keeps the peace in Asia and protects our interests elsewhere in the world, that's a core challenge for Americans. But the battlefield will not be Tibet.
I would say
No, I wouldn't add Taiwan in the sense that there are a set of commitments made by the United States government with regard to Taiwan and the way the Taiwanese quarrel will be managed that we'll stick by.
Well, simply two things. The international community always had a great deal of trouble with the concept that great states that had expanded their territory on land were somehow engaged in colonization. I used to have to sit in UN decolonization debates endlessly about the future of territories which had been taken over by my country by expeditionary forces that had gone by sea. But nobody, of course, would dare talk to Russia about the future of far larger territories involving millions more people, which had been taken by the Tsars and their successors, the communist Tsars, by sending expeditionary forces by land. And my second comment would be that the fate of Tibet, like so many other issues, just brings to the fore once more the significance of international cooperation on both human rights and international law itself, particularly international humanitarian law. Because if you can't correct an injustice in terms of sovereignty over a territory, the international community has still a right under the Charter of the United Nations to seek better treatment of the people who live within that territory.
Quick one.
As you see younger people entering the diplomatic service on either side of the pond, are they, I'm sure they're plenty bright. Do they have the appreciation of history that you all have? And do they really understand what's gone before?
You know, I think one of the great misperceptions is that the Anglo-American relationship was a sort of bed of classic roses. In fact, we in Britain have disagreed a great deal.
You disagree sometimes. You agree.
We've disagreed strongly with Britain, and Britain has had her moments with us. I lived in Britain in 1956 when we split over Suez in a really extraordinary way. The United States found itself with the Soviet Union of the day condemning France and Britain. I remember the disagreements at the time
Israel.
of Harold Macmillan over, and there have been many other instances. But by and large, the great principles laid out by Roosevelt and Churchill in Newfoundland have somehow captured the spirit of the two sides. They represent the institutions that we all commonly accept. We have a stronger basis. But I am worried today for the relationship. I'm worried because for two reasons. Our own lack of sensitivity to the power of this relationship, and Britain's increasing intention to look inside herself, reduce the size of her military forces, her intelligence services, and her diplomatic service. I consider that just hugely troublesome. I'd hate to think the damage that would be done to the U.S.-British relationship if, perish the thought, Britain were to exit the European Union, the famous Brexit argument. For we look so much to Britain to help us manage our relationships with the rest of Western Europe. So, like all important things in life, this takes work, and we need to apply ourselves. It doesn't just, as night follow day, that strong common principles will decide the outcome. You've got to work to make the house work.
Well, thank you very much for that. So that concludes our... Sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
I was simply going to add, sorry,
No,
Professor, we shouldn't talk about special relationship. I think the term indispensable relationship is the one that should take its place. I mean, yes, history is special. What we did in the war together is special. The fact that we speak the same language, we confer more with each other than with any other country individually, that is also special. But our interests do clash. Sometimes in my bitterer moments, I say that my career in the Middle East has been spent coping with the consequences of wrong policies adopted by the United States. So we have had and do have our problems. So let's think of it as an indispensable relationship, and let's make sure that our young diplomats do know the history, and that they do know that the politicians on each side value the contribution that each makes to the life of the other.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That concludes our session.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for coming. I'd like to thank my students for handing in interesting questions, and thank our distinguished panelists for a wonderful session. Thank you.